The slap never landed. 600 guests froze mid-breath as a woman in a $2 million gown swung her open palm toward the face of a maid in a plain black and white uniform, and stopped, wrist caught mid-air, held by a grip that did not shake. Crystal chandeliers threw gold light across a ballroom built for kings, and for one suspended second, no one in the city of Wanhei breathed. Champagne glasses hung frozen between fingers. A string quartet's bow paused on the note. Somewhere near the back wall, a photographer's camera clicked without permission, capturing the exact instant a woman named Yoon Se-ah discovered that her hand, for the first time in her adult life, had met resistance. Everyone in Wanhei knew one truth about Yoon Se-ah. She did not lose. Not arguments, not lawsuits, not men, not rooms. She had built an empire of smiles and daggers, married to no one but claimed by everyone as the future wife of Ju Hyun-woo, the coldest, most feared businessman south of the river, a man whose name alone could empty a courtroom or fill one. Se-ah wore his silence like jewelry. She wore his power like perfume. And tonight, at his gala, wearing diamonds sewn into silk, she believed the entire room belonged to her. She had not expected the maid to hold her wrist and not let go. The woman in the uniform was tall, dark-skinned, quiet in a way that made noise feel foolish. Her name was Adaze Chukwu, and nobody in that ballroom, not the diplomats, not the old money families, not even Ju Hyun-woo himself, watching from across the room with his jaw tightening, knew that the waitress had spent 3 years preparing for this exact moment. They only saw a maid who should have flinched. She did not flinch. She looked disappointed, the way a teacher looks at a child who has failed a lesson she'd already explained twice. Whispers rippled outward from the center of the room, like water disturbed by a stone. Somewhere, a woman gasped into her husband's shoulder. A young intern lowered his phone slightly, only to raise it higher, and Ju Hyun-woo, the man the tabloids called the Emperor of Wanhei, the man 3 governments quietly feared, the man who had not shown a real emotion in public since his 21st birthday, took one step forward without realizing he had moved at all, because he had seen thousands of people flinch from Se-ah in his presence. He had never seen anyone stop her. Before this story goes any further, if you believe that dignity cannot be bought and courage doesn't ask permission, take a moment right now to like this video. Share it with someone who needs reminding that the quiet ones are often the strongest. Drop a comment with the word unshaken, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Your support is the reason stories like Adaze's reach the people who need them most. Nobody in that ballroom knew yet that the woman holding Se-ah's wrist was about to unravel an empire built on stolen lives, and that by morning, nothing about Wanhei's golden circle would ever look the same again. 3 years earlier, in a small coastal town outside Accra, Adaze Chukwu had watched her father's coffin lowered into red earth while rain fell so hard it looked like the sky itself was grieving. Dr. Emeka Chukwu had not died the way the official report claimed. The paper said heart failure. The paper was wrong, and Adaze had known it the moment she opened his study and found the safe already emptied, the desk drawers pulled out and left hanging like broken jaws. Her father had been a forensic accountant, the quiet genius international auditors called when numbers refused to make sense. For 11 months before his death, he had been tracing a humanitarian relief fund meant to build schools and clinics across 3 countries, a fund worth billions moving through shell companies with names too clean to be honest. He had found where the money went. He had not lived long enough to say it out loud. What he left behind was a single flash drive, sealed in a biscuit tin, and 7 words written in his careful handwriting. The woman responsible wears diamonds and smiles. Adaze had been 25 then, a graduate student with a scholarship and a little sister Ngozi, still in secondary school. She had 2 choices: grieve quietly and let the world forget her father's death the way it forgot most inconvenient truths, or become someone the world would never suspect of remembering anything at all. She chose the second. She sold what little her father left her. She took Ngozi to live with their aunt in Kumasi and promised to send money every month, a promise she had never once broken, even when it meant skipping meals. She learned Korean in 18 months, worked double shifts at a hotel restaurant to afford lessons, and then boarded a plane to Wanhei carrying one suitcase and a flash drive she had never dared to fully decrypt. Not because she couldn't, but because she was terrified of what completing the decryption would cost her. She took a job as a waitress at Celine Catering, the company contracted for nearly every high society event in the city. It was invisible work. Nobody remembers a waitress's face. Nobody suspects a tray carrier of anything more dangerous than spilled wine. That invisibility was the whole plan. For 3 years, Adaize poured champagne into glasses held by the very people her father had died investigating. She memorized names, she photographed guest lists, she learned which foundations existed only on paper, which charities never built the schools their brochures promised, which board members flew private jets funded by grants meant for orphanages, and slowly, one encrypted file at a time, she pieced together the name her father had died trying to speak. Yoon Se-ah. Se-ah's family had run the Hanul Children's Relief Foundation for over a decade, a name synonymous with generosity in Wanhei's social pages, photographed beside smiling children in donated uniforms. What the photographs never showed was the second set of books, the ones tracking money that entered the foundation and left again within 72 hours, routed through construction companies that built nothing, then into private accounts registered to names that traced back, again and again, to Seah herself. Adiz had found the first thread of it 8 months into her job, buried in a spreadsheet she wasn't supposed to see, left open on a laptop she'd been asked to carry from one banquet hall to another. She had photographed it in 11 seconds while pretending to check her own phone. She kept that photo in a folder labeled Recipes. She told no one, not her sister, not the two friends she'd made at the restaurant, certainly not Ju Hyun-woo, the man whose company hosted half the galas she worked and whose name appeared disturbingly often on documents she couldn't yet explain. She had studied him from a distance the way she studied everyone, coldly, carefully, without sentiment. The tabloids called him ruthless. The staff who'd worked his events for years called him worse, in whispers, when they thought no one Korean fluent was listening. He never smiled in photographs. He rarely spoke more than necessary. And yet twice, Adiz had watched him quietly settle a caterer's unpaid invoice himself when the client tried to walk away without paying. Cash, no receipt, no acknowledgement, done and forgotten before anyone noticed. She had filed that contradiction away too. She filed everything away. That was who she had become. A woman built entirely of patience, waiting for one night when patience would no longer be necessary. Tonight was supposed to be an ordinary shift. It was the night the entire plan had been building toward, whether Adiz had admitted it to herself or not. The Kang, no. The Jew Investment Group's annual charity gala was the single largest social event on Wanhei's calendar, and this year it carried a weight no one could ignore. Rumor had spread for weeks that Ju Hyun-woo would announce his engagement to Yoon Se-ah before the night was through. The ballroom of the Wanhei Grand had been transformed into something out of a dream reserved only for the very rich. Ceilings draped in white silk, 17 crystal chandeliers imported from Vienna, round tables set with gold-rimmed china that cost more per plate than most of the serving staff earned in a month. Adiz arrived at 4 in the afternoon with the rest of the Celine catering crew, changed into her uniform in a cramped staff room that smelled of bleach and cut flowers, and pinned her hair back with the same steady hands she used for everything. Hands that did not shake even when carrying trays worth more, in liability alone, than her yearly rent. She had watched Seah destroy people before. It was practically a hobby. 3 months earlier, at a smaller fundraiser, Seah had reduced a junior event coordinator to tears over a floral arrangement that was, by every measurable standard, correct, simply because the coordinator had dared to suggest peonies instead of orchids. The coordinator was fired within the week. Seah had not raised her voice once during the incident. She never needed to. Cruelty for her was a quiet art delivered with a smile so the guests around her would mistake it for charm. Adiz had watched a bellhop get dismissed for accidentally brushing Seah's coat. She had watched a violinist forced to replay an entire piece because Seah decided, mid-song, that the tempo offended her. Nobody stopped her. Nobody dared. Wanhei's elite understood an unspoken rule: cross Yoon Se-ah, and you cross the shadow of Ju Hyun-woo himself, whether he intended it or not. Adaze had absorbed every act of cruelty the way her father had once absorbed columns of numbers. Silently, methodically, building a case no one knew she was building. She had learned patience from watching her father work. He used to say that the loudest people in any room were rarely the most dangerous ones. The dangerous ones counted quietly in the corner until the numbers finally added up to something undeniable. Tonight, hers finally had. The flash drive sat in a small waterproof pouch strapped beneath her uniform, against her ribs where she could feel its outline with every breath. She had made 3 backup copies stored in 3 different places, a decision her father had drilled into her before she'd even understood why it mattered. Never carry the only copy of the truth into a room full of people who don't want to hear it, he used to say. At 7:40, Seah arrived in a custom gown embroidered with real diamonds, and the entire ballroom rose like a wave breaking toward shore, cameras flashing, guests applauding, the string quartet shifting seamlessly into something grander. Ju Hyun-woo stood near the dais in a black suit, expression unreadable, watching the woman the world assumed he was about to marry glide across a floor built to worship her. Adez, balancing a tray of champagne near the back hallway that connected the kitchen to the main floor, felt her pulse steady rather than race. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times without knowing exactly when it would come. She simply hadn't expected it to arrive by accident. It happened in 4 seconds. Adez turned a corner near the dessert table exactly as Seah spun to greet a diplomat's wife, and the hem of Seah's gown caught the edge of Adez's tray. A graze, nothing more, barely enough to disturb a single glass. But Seah's face changed instantly, the practiced warmth of her public smile collapsing into something colder, older, uglier. "Do you have any idea," she said, loud enough for a dozen tables to hear, "how much this dress costs?" The ballroom's chatter dimmed like a dimmer switch turning slowly downward. "I apologize," Adaizi said, steady, not lowering her eyes the way she was trained to. "It was an accident." An accident. Sia repeated the word like it tasted bad. She looked Adaizi over. The uniform, the dark skin, the calm, and something in her expression sharpened into contempt. "People like you don't belong in rooms like this." A ripple of laughter moved through the nearest tables. Not everyone, but enough. Enough that Adiz understood in that instant exactly how alone a person could be surrounded by 600 witnesses. Seah's hand rose before Adiz fully registered it was happening. An open palm, aimed with the casual cruelty of someone who had never once been told no. Adiz caught her wrist. She didn't think about it. Her hand simply moved, closing around bone and diamond bracelet with a grip that had spent 3 years carrying loaded trays through crowded kitchens and did not know how to be gentle when gentleness was no longer useful. Seah's mouth opened in shock. The slap that had been meant to land hung frozen in the air between them. For 3 full seconds, nobody in the ballroom moved. Then Seah wrenched her arm free, breathing hard, humiliation flooding her face redder than any slap could have. "Security!" she shrieked. "Get this! Get her out of here now!" 2 men in dark suits began moving through the crowd. Guests at nearby tables leaned forward, some already recording, sensing the shape of a scandal before it had fully arrived. Across the room, Ju Hyun-woo had gone very still. He had watched Seah humiliate staff before, at smaller events, in smaller ways, and each time some old, tired part of him had looked away rather than intervene, telling himself it wasn't his place, that the world simply worked this way for people like her, that it cost him nothing to stay silent. Tonight, something in him refused to look away, because the waitress standing at the center of 600 stairs did not look afraid. She looked disappointed. The way you look at someone who has just confirmed everything you already suspected about them. As security closed in, Adiz did something no one in that ballroom had ever witnessed a member of the serving staff do. She raised her hand and asked calmly for a microphone. Laughter broke out across half the room, sharp, disbelieving, cruel in its own quiet way. A waitress requesting the microphone at Wanhei's most prestigious gala, as if she were about to deliver a toast. "Get her out!" Seah snapped again, straightening her dress, forcing her voice back into its practiced elegance. "She's clearly unstable." Wait, the word came from Ju Hyun Woo, and it landed harder than any slap could have, because in 12 years of hosting this exact gala, no one present had ever heard him interrupt Seo in public. He walked forward, ignoring the sea of stares, and stopped an arm's length from the woman in the maid's uniform. "Give her the microphone," he said. The room fell into the kind of silence that costs something to maintain. 600 people holding their breath at once, waiting to see whether this was the beginning of a scandal or the end of one. A staff member handed Adaise a wireless microphone with trembling hands. She took it without trembling at all. "My name is Adaise Chukwu," she began, and her voice, amplified now through the ballroom speakers, carried none of the fear the crowd expected. 3 years ago, my father, Dr. Emeka Chukwu, was murdered for discovering the truth about the Hanul Children's Relief Foundation. Sea's face drained of color so completely that even from across the room, Ju Hyun Woo saw it happen. "You're insane," Sea hissed, but her voice had lost its edge. "Someone remove her." "He left behind evidence," Adaise continued, pulling a slim tablet from beneath the folded linen napkin she had carried in her apron all evening. A detail no one had thought to search, because no one searches a maid. "Evidence I have spent 3 years verifying, cross-referencing, and protecting." She turned the tablet screen outward, and a projection screen behind the dais, the one meant to display Sea's engagement announcement, flickered to life instead, mirroring the tablet's display for the entire ballroom to see. Rows of transaction data appeared: wire transfers, shell company registrations, photographs of construction sites that had received millions in funding and remained, 3 years later, empty lots. "The Hanul Foundation," Adaise said, her voice cutting clean through the stunned silence, "has diverted over $400 million meant for schools and hospitals across West Africa and Southeast Asia. Not one school was built. Not one hospital opened. The money moved through 11 shell companies before arriving in personal accounts registered under Yoon Sea's name." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A government minister near the front rose halfway from his seat before sitting back down, as if unsure whether standing implicated him in something. "She's lying," Sea said, too loudly, too fast. "This is fabricated. She's clearly some kind of extortionist." "I have bank records," Adaise said calmly, advancing to the next slide. "I have shipping manifests linking the same shell companies to trafficking routes for stolen cultural artifacts. And I have something else." She looked directly at Ju Hyun Woo for the first time all evening. "Toxicology reports," she said quietly, "confirming trace amounts of a sedative compound in wine bottles sourced exclusively from Ms. Yoon's personal cellar and served repeatedly over the past 2 years at private dinners attended only by Mr. Ju." The ballroom erupted into chaos. A wave of gasps and shouted questions, chairs scraping back, phones raised higher. Ju Hyun Woo's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did. A slow, terrible recalibration, as if pieces of his own life he had never questioned were suddenly rearranging themselves into a shape he didn't recognize. "You've been drugging me," he said. It wasn't a question. "Hyun Woo!" Sia's composure finally cracked entirely, her voice climbing into something desperate. "You have to understand, it wasn't what?" His voice, when it came, was quiet in the way a held breath is quiet, controlled, but only barely. "Malicious?" Sea said nothing. "There's more," Adaise said, and something in her tone made even Sea go still. "This isn't only about money." Adaise advanced to the final slide, and the ballroom's air seemed to thin. 27 years ago," she said, "a woman gave birth to a son in a private clinic outside the city and was told her child had died. She was lied to. The child did not die. He was placed with a wealthy family who raised him as their own, and the truth of his birth was buried, because the woman responsible for burying it needed a stake in what that child would one day become." She turned to face Ju Hyun Woo directly. "The woman raising you was not your biological mother," she said gently now, the courtroom precision of her voice softening for the first time all night. "Ms. Yoon's family orchestrated the Arrangement 27 years ago in exchange for a permanent, silent partnership in what would become Jew Investment Group. Your entire inheritance was built on a lie designed to give her family perpetual leverage over you. Leverage she has used quietly for over a decade. Ju Hyun-woo did not move. He did not speak. Somewhere behind his composed, unreadable face, 27 years of certainty were collapsing at once. Se-ah, cornered now on every side, did the only thing left available to her? She smiled, thin, brittle, dangerous. "You think you're so clever?" she said, turning on Adaze with a venom that finally matched the room's growing horror. "Standing there in your little uniform, playing hero. Then tell them, Adaze. Tell them who you really are." The room's attention swung back toward Adaez like a searchlight. Seah produced a folder of her own, thinner but no less devastating, and held it aloft. "This waitress," she announced, "is the sole heir of Chukwu Global Resources, a $20 billion mining and technology conglomerate. She has been lying to every person in this building for 3 years, hiding behind an apron while judging the rest of us for the crime of being honest about who we are." The silence that followed was different from before, not horror but disbelief, rearranging itself in real time. Ju Hyun-woo turned to look at Adaze fully for the first time, and something unreadable passed across his face. Adaze did not flinch from the accusation. "It's true," she said simply. "I am the heir to my father's company. I hid it because the people who killed him were wealthy enough to make his death look natural, and I understood, better than anyone in this room, exactly what wealth can bury. I didn't want revenge bought with money. I wanted the truth, delivered by someone they'd never suspect of remembering it." She let the silence hold for one long breath before continuing. "My father is dead because he found the truth first," she said, her voice for the only time that night catching slightly. "I was not going to let that truth die with him." What followed unfolded in the strange, accelerated way that public disgrace always does. Fast, then faster, like a dam breaking one stone at a time until the entire wall gives way at once. Two board members of Jew Investment Group, seated near the front, quietly stood and walked toward the exits, phones already pressed to their ears, the sound of resignations being drafted in real time. A junior minister who had accepted funding from the Hanul Foundation went pale and excused himself before the applause even started, understanding better than most in the room what the coming weeks would bring. Security, moments earlier prepared to drag Adayezi from the building, now stood frozen, awaiting instruction from a man who had not spoken a word in nearly a minute. Ju Hyun-woo finally turned to Seah. "12 years," he said quietly. 12 years I let you run half my public life, and you spent it selling my privacy to the people who stole my mother from me. I loved you," Seah said, and for the first time, something in her voice sounded almost human. "Everything else, it started as strategy, but I loved you." "You drugged me," he said. "Love doesn't do that." Security finally moved, not toward Adayez, but toward Seah, whose face collapsed from cruelty into something closer to panic, as two officers, quietly summoned by a call Ju Hyun-woo had made without anyone noticing, stepped through the ballroom's side entrance. The guests who had laughed 20 minutes earlier now sat in stunned, complicit silence. One by one, small acts of courage rippled through the crowd. A caterer who had once been fired unjustly by Seah stood and spoke to a reporter near the door. A junior coordinator who'd been humiliated months earlier finally allowed herself to say, out loud, exactly what had happened to her. The silent had found their voices, now that the loudest voice in the room had finally been proven wrong. Ju Hyun-woo crossed the ballroom floor and stood before Adeze, the waitress who was not a waitress, the heiress who had spent 3 years disguised as someone the world overlooked. "Thank you," he said, quiet enough that only she could hear it. "For telling the truth in a room built entirely on people who'd rather not hear it." Adaze studied him for a long moment, the exhaustion behind his composure, the grief he hadn't yet let himself feel for a mother he'd just learned was stolen from him. "I didn't do it for you," she said honestly. "I did it for my father, but I'm glad it also freed you." The weeks that followed moved like a landslide no one could stop. Yoon Se-ah was formally charged with fraud, conspiracy, and multiple counts of unlawful drug administration. The Hanel Foundation's assets were frozen within 72 hours, and international investigators, alerted by Adaisi's evidence cross-filed with agencies across 3 continents, began unraveling a trafficking network far larger than anyone had suspected, one that moved stolen artifacts through the same shell companies that had laundered charity funds meant for children who never saw a single dollar of it. Ju Hyun-woo discovered in the weeks after the gala that his own chief advisor, a man who'd worked beside him for 11 years, had been quietly feeding information to Sea's family the entire time. The betrayal cut deeper than the drugging had in some ways. It was proof that his isolation had not been an accident of temperament, but something engineered around him, brick by brick, since he was old enough to be useful. He began working with the Days, cautiously at first, 2 people who trusted almost no one learning, slowly to trust each other. They cross-referenced her father's files with Ju Hyun-woo's internal records and uncovered a network stretching from Wonhae to Accra to 3 cities in between, laundering money through foundations that photographed well and delivered nothing. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous the truth became. Twice, cars followed Adie's taxi through the city at night before peeling away at the last intersection. Once, a man was found loitering outside the modest apartment she'd kept for 3 years, and Ju Hyun-woo, without asking her permission, assigned 2 members of his security detail to her building the following morning. She did not thank him for it right away. She was not used to being protected by anyone but herself, but she noticed things about him she hadn't expected. He learned to cook a dish from her childhood after finding a video of her describing it to a security guard, badly, from memory. He read through hours of her father's old university lectures, translated haltingly through subtitles, simply to understand the mind of the man whose death had reshaped his own life without his knowledge. He never once, in all their late nights poring over financial records, asked her to be softer, quieter, smaller than she was. Slowly, warily, something neither of them had planned for began to grow between them. Not the fairy tale the tabloids would eventually invent, but something steadier. 2 people who had each spent years being underestimated, recognizing finally someone who saw them clearly. The largest twist arrived on a rain-soaked Tuesday, 6 weeks after the gala, when a woman walked into the temporary offices Adaise and Ju Hyun-woo had set up to manage the investigation and said quietly, "I believe you're looking for me." It was Dr. Emeka Chukwu's sister? No. It was Dr. Emeka Chukwu himself, aged and thinner than the photograph on Adaise's nightstand, alive. He had faked his death 3 years earlier, he explained, hands trembling as he spoke, because he had discovered that Sea's network extended further than any single report could safely expose. Deep enough into international protection agencies that a living witness would have been silenced within days. He had spent 3 years undercover, feeding fragments of evidence to contacts he trusted absolutely, waiting for the moment his daughter's independent investigation might finally converge with his own. He had watched her, from a careful distance, for longer than she would ever fully know. Adaise did not speak for nearly a full minute after recognizing him. When she finally crossed the room, it was not with questions, but with an embrace that broke 3 years of composure in a single motion. A second revelation followed within days. Ju Hyun-woo's biological mother, long presumed dead or vanished, was found alive as well, living under a different name 2 provinces away. A woman who had spent decades quietly working within human rights organizations, investigating the very trafficking networks that had stolen her son from her at birth. The 2 families, it turned out, had been circling the same criminal organization for over 20 years without ever realizing their paths would one day cross in a single ballroom on a single night. The final confrontation came aboard a private yacht anchored off the coast of Busan. During an exclusive gathering, Sea's remaining allies had arranged in a last desperate attempt to salvage what was left of their network before international warrants closed in. Sea, out on bail and cornered with nothing left to leverage, made one final move, abducting Ju Hyun-woo's newly recovered mother and threatening to release a cache of classified files that would implicate half the guest list from that fateful gala unless the investigation stopped. It did not stop. Ju Hyun-woo and Adaiz arrived aboard the yacht with a small team and a live feed already broadcasting to international media, dismantling what remained of the organization in real time as officers moved through the vessel's lower decks. Sia's own allies, sensing the operation collapsing beyond saving, turned on her within minutes, revealing, in their scramble for immunity, that she had never controlled the network at all. She had been a pawn from the beginning, groomed by her own family to believe she held power she'd never actually possessed. She attempted to flee by helicopter. She did not make it past the harbor. In her final moments before authorities took her into custody, stripped of every advantage that had once made her untouchable, Seiya said the only honest thing she had spoken all night. "I did love him," she said quietly, to no one and everyone. "I just wanted power more." Justice, when it finally arrived, came slowly and without spectacle, the way real justice usually does, in courtrooms and quiet settlements rather than dramatic reveals. Sia's trial stretched across 18 months. The Hanul Foundation's frozen assets, once recovered, were redirected, under new, transparent oversight, into the very schools and clinics they had always claimed to build. Ju Hyun-woo stepped back from the shadow businesses that had made his name feared rather than respected, restructuring his empire into what would become one of Asia's largest philanthropic foundations, working this time in genuine partnership with the Chukwu family's resources and expertise. Dr. Emeka Chukwu returned to public life as an advisor on international financial transparency, his testimony instrumental in shutting down 3 more shell networks across 2 continents. Ngozi, Adaizi's younger sister, graduated with honors and began her own studies in forensic accounting, following quietly in the footsteps of a father she now understood far better than she once had. Adaizi herself stepped into her role at Chukwu Global Resources, not as a distant executive, but as someone who had spent 3 years understanding firsthand what it meant to be overlooked by exactly the kind of people her company now employed by the thousands. 8 months after the gala, Wanhei Grand hosted another event beneath the same 17 chandeliers, though nothing about the room felt the same. Ju Hyun-woo stood at the same dais where an engagement had once been rumored and never announced, and this time, he did not hesitate. "The world once knew her as a waitress," he told the gathered crowd, his voice carrying none of the coldness it once had. "I know her as the woman who told the truth in a room that had forgotten how." He turned to Adaiz, who stood at the edge of the room in a gown she had chosen herself. Not diamonds, not silk imported for spectacle, but something simple and entirely her own, and knelt before 600 witnesses who had once laughed at her in the exact spot where she had once caught a stranger's wrist mid-swing. The ballroom did not laugh this time. It rose, applauding as Adizi Chukwu, daughter of a man who refused to stay silent, sister to a girl who would carry his legacy forward, heir to a fortune she had never once used as a shield, said yes to a man who had learned, finally, what it meant to be seen without power standing in the way. There is a particular kind of courage that never makes headlines on its own. The courage of staying quiet long enough to be certain, of carrying the truth for 3 years without letting bitterness curdle it into something smaller than justice. Adaizi Chukwu was never the loudest person in any room she entered. She simply refused to let a room's silence decide what was true. The bravest people rarely announce themselves. They carry trays. They wear uniforms the world glances past without seeing. They wait, not out of weakness, but out of the discipline it takes to make sure that when they finally speak, no one can look away. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that dignity is never something anyone else has the right to take from you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs this reminder today, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage, truth, and the human spirit. And before you go, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were standing in Adizi's place that night? Because sometimes the bravest people are not the loudest, not the richest, not the most powerful. They are the ordinary souls who choose truth when the world chooses silence, and that single choice changes everything.